Your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.
I love you. What the hell happened to you?
Welcome to the weekly horoscope, horror fans, and happy Valentine's Day. Here we are at Valentine's Day 2024. I'm your host, Jerry, here with my partner, Matt. And Matt, love is in the air. What a wonderful time of year. What do you think of our subject today?
It's a great subject. I think it's one of the most fun subjects throughout the year because it's like you said, love's in the air, and it's a celebration of love. And a lot of these horror movies, it's just a celebration of toxic relationships and serial killers and and just overall fun. And a lot of these movies tend to be comedic, and other movies tend to be on the real deep side, which I think we'll dive into both of those tonight.
And love is, to me, the most powerful emotion in the world. And, I'm lucky enough to have a world full of people I love and who I think love me. And it's just a great thing. But love can also go bad. And we've seen empires crumble, and we've seen people commit murder, and we've seen horrible things happen all in the name of love. So our topic is actually love hurts, because let's face it, we're a horror movie show, and sometimes it really does.
Yeah, and you're right. Love can quickly flip on its head and turn into resentment. And I think we've all kind of been in situations in life like that, or it can take a turn of betrayal. If you look at Dante's Inferno, betrayal is the seventh layer of hell, right? And oftentimes in relationships, when you find yourself loving someone and then feeling betrayed, you're instantly in hell. And so it can turn from a beautiful thing into a monstrous thing.
Something so powerful would certainly run both ends of the spectrum on emotions, good and bad, and that's kind of reflected here in our subject. As we like to do this week, we present two very, very different movies, and we're going to start with Bride of Chucky from 1998, directed by Ronnie Yu. And I got to admit, I had not seen this movie before, and this movie's nuts.
This is one of my favorite horror comedies of all time. I saw it when I was younger. The first three Chucky movies they're a trilogy. They're a serious trilogy, and they had to do something fresh with these movies. They had to bring in something new. They did two very different things. It was a big risk take that they made. They brought in a second character to rival Chucky on screen, which is hard to do. You're taking the main character and saying, "Hey, we're going to bring someone else in," with Jennifer Tilly, who knocks it out the park. And then on top of that, they make it more of a comedy, right? Like it's this movie's funny to me. Like I think the banter between them is funny. They take a whole new direction. So you have the first three Chucky movies that are serious, and if you get tired of that, if you get like, oh, okay, what do they do? Make another serious Chucky movie? Like, no, go watch The Bride of Chucky. It's just funny.
Yeah, I categorize this in my notes as completely a comedy. There's there's killings,
There's
and
kills, there's
blood,
kills.
but there's
psychopaths. Yeah.
there's no real tension or horror moments. It's just funny kills.
Even when he pulls the knife out, Tiffany is just like, what is this? The 80s? Is that thing glued to you? Like, there's way more original ways to kill people nowadays. Like they're even poking fun at 80s slashers. It's fun.
Yeah, the movie starts in a police evidence locker where there's artifacts from Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers locked up. So they're throwing a nod to the slashers right away. A dirty cop takes a bag of evidence he's obviously been bribed to deliver. And when he goes to make the delivery, he gets his throat slit by Tiffany, who is the former lover of the killer who's stuck in Chucky's body.
And she then takes the knife, files her nail, and then licks it.
Yeah. And so what he delivered to her was Chucky's mangled body. The doll's all torn up. It's ripped apart.
From the third one, when he got hacked up. Yeah.
And she proceeds to sew him back together, staple parts of him together. And what results is an absolute mess. He looks like Chucky and Frankenstein combined, which is very perfect for the Bride of Chucky as a reference point.
And they don't even make it meta. They put that right in the movie when she's watching it later on. Yeah.
She performs a ritual over the doll using a book, Voodoo for Dummies, which I thought was funny.
Yeah.
And it does bring Chucky back, who he quickly murders her current boyfriend, Damien, who is we find out when his murder is reported, he's like the super ultra nerd, but with her, he's trying to be like this goth metal,
Murder. He's pretending to be a
razor
murderer. I killed
killer.
someone, baby. Yeah.
And it's like, okay, he was not pulling that off. But Chucky quickly kills him anyways. The chief of police, if you wonder, how serious this movie is John Ritter,
The great John Ritter. Yeah.
comedy legend. And he's trying to keep his niece Jade away from her boyfriend Jesse. And he has a funny, it's an odd line to me because like he's kind of a douche, right? He's very controlling, he's very mean, but he says, once you turn 18, you can go to hell for all I care. And that line struck me as odd. Like, who as a guardian would say that? Be so controlling and demanding over a person at 17, but then I completely don't care what happens to you at 18.
It's almost like a testament to his conscientiousness. Like he was given this role, like as guardian. Her parents died, so he's now has to take care of them. We don't know the relation really, and so he's just conscientious. Like I'm supposed to do this, and when I'm done, my job's over, kind of thing. Right? That's his character. Yeah.
Yeah, and he just thinks her boyfriend Jesse's from the wrong side of the tracks. Typical story.
It's like a '50s thing or something, 1950s thing. Yeah.
Back to Tiffany, Jennifer Tilly, as you mentioned, she believed that Chucky, or the soul that's inside of Chucky, was going to ask her to marry him before his spirit got stuck in the doll. And he laughs at her and ridicules the idea of being married to that he was going to marry her. And she gets mad. And, we've seen she's a killer. She doesn't care about anything.
Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned.
And she was scorned. And she locks him in a caged playpen. And he's just like stuck in there and he's like swearing and stuff. And she's like, you're not getting out. But she comes home with a large bride doll to keep him company. She's like, here, marry this.
They're just making the whole movie. They're just making fun of each other.
Yeah. Well, one night she's in the tub and she's sitting there watching Bride of Frankenstein on television, which, like as you said, the reference is not really secret. And Chucky manages to get loose. And we know him to be a clever and, ingenuitive little son of a gun.
Yeah.
He gets loose and electrocutes Tiffany in the tub, where she's watching this movie, and all this electricity fries and everything's swirling around. And she ends up with her spirit transferred into the bride doll.
So they're off to the races. It's real simple plot. They don't try to overcomplicate it. Even when she has the voodoo for dummies, like, well, how does she figure this out? I don't know. She had a voodoo for dummies. You know what I mean? Like they
Right.
make it real simple. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't stop at any of those plot points. They just fly through it.
Yeah.
It's all story and it's all ridiculous, but there's some fun into it.
Yeah.
He tells her that, and they continue to fight, but now they realize they're kind of in this together. But he tells her when he died, he was wearing an amulet that has magical powers and will put them back into human bodies if they can just get to where his body is in New Jersey.
So it's a nice reference to the original movie.
Mm-hmm. So Tiffany, over the phone, hires her neighbor, Jesse, who happens to be our chief of police's niece's boyfriend, hires Jesse to take the dolls to New Jersey. So he comes in and there's a note and the money on the sofa. He takes the two dolls, throws them in the back of his van, and he stops to see Jade, and he proposes to her and asks her to go with him. And I'm going, wait a minute, she's not even 18. Like we just heard she's not 18. Like, you're really seriously getting married?
Yeah, and then you get the great banter with Chucky and Tiffany, and they're just commenting on it like Muppets, like he's like, oh, this won't last 6 months, and like,
yeah,
he's like, sucker, like, and she's like, shut up, and like,
yeah, they're like the two old Muppets in the balcony.
Yeah.
Well, Chief Warren is kind of aware of all this going on, so when they go inside for her to pack, he opens the van and he plants a bag of marijuana, and he's gonna stop him. But the dolls, realizing that their trip is in jeopardy, they murder him. And this is where he pulls out a knife, and Tiffany's like, wait a minute, that's so 80s. There's so much better ways to kill people nowadays.
Right. Because
And
the original one came out in 1988, so
it was 10 years exactly.
The whole movie's meta. Yeah.
So they instead blast a huge lot of nails into his face.
Yeah.
And in what I thought was, to me, was the best line of the movie.
I know you're gonna. Yeah. Yep.
He's sitting there with his head completely covered in nails, and Chucky references like, "Ah, he looks familiar." A reference to Pinhead from the Hellraiser
1987,
movies.
another 80s movie. Yeah.
So I thought that was good.
Yeah.
They hide the body in a trunk in the back of the van, and the kids go on. They get pulled over by one of the chief's cronies, a guy who is just always hassling them.
They call him Needle Nose. Oh, great! Here comes Needle Nose.
Yeah. So he stops him. He goes back to his car to call it in, and Chucky sneaks back and blows up the car. Well, there's witnesses. They're at like a rest stop, like a gas station. Witnesses all over. They start to run and take off, but now everyone thinks they blew up the cop. Her uncle's missing, and there's been other murders that we're aware of. They think they got a Bonnie and Clyde situation here, or like natural born killers, where they're killers on the run. So they're all over the news now. They stop in Niagara Falls and actually get married, which I find really weird. And while they're getting married,
Niagara Falls stays in Niagara Falls.
Yeah. While they're getting married at this, this love hotel, the chief was not dead, and he wakes up, and now Chucky just knifes him to death and says, "See, good old reliable, works every time." Once they're in their honeymoon suite in the hotel, another couple storms into their room and like jumps up on their bed, and they're being really weird and acting like they want to swing. But they throw them out.
They're con artists, really. Yeah. They're trying to steal stuff from the room.
It turns out they were thieves, and they took stuff, and Tiffany saw it, and she's not going to let that stand. So this couple goes back to their room, and in what I thought was the best kill of the movie, Tiffany shatters the mirror over their love bed.
The love mirror, yeah.
Yeah, the mirror directly over. She throws something up, shatters it, and all the shards of glass fall down and impale both bodies all over the bed.
And it's a water bed, right? So not only that, it just kind of there's blood and water soaked and splashing into the room. So it's a cool effect. Yeah.
Yeah, really. I thought that was the best death in the movie.
Great.
And Chucky witnesses all this, and he says, "Wow, he says, I love you." Like, that's what put him over the edge. He was hesitant to be in this relationship until he saw her do that, and now he's in awe, and he's completely in love.
Yeah.
He proposes to her right there, and we get to witness plastic doll sex.
In a way, but there's a funny line where she's like, "Do you have a rubber?" And he's like, "I'm all rubber." What are you doing?
Yeah, right.
This is the very Team America part of the movie where
good reference. Yeah. Jesse and Jade, meanwhile, are in their room, and they're seeing the news, and they're starting to become suspicious that each other's the killer. And they have a mutual friend, Dave, and they both separately call him, saying, Jade saying, I think Jesse might have done it, and I'm really worried. And Jesse calls and said, I think Jade may have done this. I'm really worried. So he realizes that neither one of them did it, and he comes and meets them. He just shows up, and he's telling them, "Hey, you guys, I know you guys, you're not like that. You're both good people. This is something else." And then he opens the trunk in the back of the van and sees the chief's body, and now he thinks they're both killers.
Flips out and grabs the gun. Yeah.
He pulls the chief's gun out and points the gun on him, and now Chucky and Tiffany both pull their guns, cornering him, and now the truth is out.
Leading up to the second best kill in the movie, in my opinion.
They make him step out of the van, where he's immediately completely obliterated by a tractor trailer.
I loved it. I've watched that scene twice. I rewound it. I was like, let's see that again. And I just want to see the.
So now nobody, yeah, there's like a mist, like
Yeah, body chunks are flying everywhere.
they now the mystery's out. Everyone is aware, including the people in the movie, what's going on. We got two killer dolls, and they're controlling everything. They hijack an RV to finish their trip, and they're clearly in charge now, and they intend on using the amulet and taking Jesse and Jade's bodies. Which I'm thinking, and I know I shouldn't be putting logic in this movie, but
No.
If you're going to steal people's bodies, do you really want them framed for a series of murders because you're going to be on the run the rest of your life in those bodies?
Well, they're already on the run. They're already serial killers anyways. They don't care, right? It's my logic. I have the same logical issue with the Purge movies. Like, murder is only legal once a year. It's like, well, I've got news for you about what murderers think about that.
Right.
They don't care.
Yeah.
That law wouldn't work because murderers are just going to keep murdering anyways.
Yeah. Laws don't apply to people who don't follow laws.
No,
so.
yeah, they don't care. They just want bodies. Right?
While they're in the RV, Tiffany starts cooking. She makes dinner and makes some cookies. And Chucky's a little unappreciative. So Jesse and Jade start pushing these seeds of discontent between them. Like, hey, look how she leaves the kitchen. That's a mess. And he's like, hey, those dishes aren't going to do themselves. And, Jade's in the back saying, my God, you just cooked for him. He's so ungrateful. And she's like, you son of a. So they're really.
And it's a reference from earlier in the movie when Jennifer Tilly's character was talking to Jesse, like, hey, you're a good guy. Make sure you do the dishes for your woman someday. Right. Yeah. And he remembers that and flips that on them.
Yeah. So they create this discontent where they're now distracted. And Jade kicks Tiffany into the open oven that's on and shuts the door. And Jesse pushes Chucky out of the window of the front seat of the RV. So we think they might have a moment of being clear, but it doesn't happen because they crash the RV. It turns over and crashes. So they really, I thought that was like a little like dumb of them, how poorly they executed that takeover plan. But
yeah, but I mean, in situations like that, you never know how you're going to act, and you're panicking, and stuff like that. I mean, I have never been in that situation, but
true. Chucky has Jade now at gunpoint and leads her to his grave, where he makes her open the coffin and get the amulet. Jesse shows up with burnt Tiffany, basically making a deal to trade the women. As they leave, Chucky throws a knife into Jesse's back and then ties them both up. And he starts performing the ritual to switch bodies. Burnt Tiffany interrupts the ritual and stabs Chucky. And she tells him, look at us. Like, we should just be dead. We should go together and be done with this. And he starts fighting her. So the two dolls fight with shovels.
Shovel fight?
Yeah, shovel fight.
Great aerial shot, by the way.
Yeah, it looked like they had real actors from above and then switched to the dolls when they kept changing the perspective. Because they seemed like they got bigger, but you could only see from overhead. But that was
agreed. That's why I was saying great aerial shot. Yeah.
Chucky gets the upper hand and ends up stabbing her with his trusty knife, but Jesse pushes Chucky into the open grave. At this point, the cops show up and they see everything, and they realize that Jesse and Jade are not the killers. And Jade finally shoots Chucky with the gun, shoots him dead. The cop tells Jesse and Jade, you kids go home, which is weird. They'd be getting statements and they had to have all kinds of information they need.
Yeah, we see that a lot in these movies though, right? Yeah.
He just tells them, you kids go home.
Yeah.
At this point, the Tiffany doll opens her eyes and starts screaming. And she delivers. She has a difficult birth, but births out a messy baby doll that immediately flies up and attacks the cop's face.
Yeah.
And leaving the door open for
Seed of Chucky, right? Which is a movie I hope we never have to watch and review. It's not a good movie. The first three Child's Play movies I love, and then this movie is just a great comedy. So but then it kind of stops there with me.
Yeah, I hadn't seen this. I've seen the first Chucky. I kind of fell off on the sequels. It wasn't really for me.
Yeah.
But this movie has some fun moments. It's certainly an example of love hurts.
This whole movie is dysfunctional. Everything in this movie is dysfunctional. I think it's just funny. I think it's well written, self-aware. It knows it's a comedy. I think it executes the comedy well. It's got some fun kills to it. The pacing's fine. It's an hour and 25-minute movie or something like that. It kind of just moves along. So if you're looking for just a fun, crazy horror comedy for Valentine's Day, I recommend it.
Absolutely. Well, in a huge tonal shift, our second movie for Love Hurts is Gerald's Game from 2017, directed by Mike Flanagan. And this movie, based on the Stephen King book that was published 25 years prior, and nothing was done with this book because it was deemed unfilmable. And not only was it filmable, the movie's fantastic.
This movie is better than I thought it was going to be. You had recommended to me a couple of years back, and I'd kind of put on my queue, and it just kind of sat there. I kind of never got to it. I was actually shocked at the psychological depth that this movie has. On paper, when you look at it, when you look at like, well, they're going to have a rendezvous. The guy's going to have a heart attack, and then the woman's kind of stuck in bed. And I'm like, you're going to get 2 hours out of that? And it turns into a character dive, a character study into someone who has a deeply disturbed psychological past, and they're trying to work that out in a horrifying situation. And that's the brilliance of Stephen King.
And that's why this was deemed unfilmable, because the majority of the story takes place in her head while she's in this difficult situation. But they pulled it off. The movie, I think, is fantastic. My notes say exactly what you just said. It's a deep psychological study and really peels back layers and layers of the human psyche through this trauma. Yeah. And the acting is out of this world.
And not only that, who better than Mike Flanagan, who we're both huge fans of. And Kate Siegel has a little part in this when she's in the one scene. I'm like, there she is.
Yep. Jesse and Gerald, those are connections. That's the only thing in common with our two movies. There's a character named Jesse in both of them.
That's it.
Jesse was the boyfriend in the last movie. Jesse is the woman in this movie, the main character. But that's really the only two things they have in common. Jesse and Gerald pack for a weekend getaway at the lake. We see him pack a couple pairs of handcuffs. On the way, they see a starving dog in the road, and you immediately get a glimpse at the differences between the two characters. She is sympathetic, and he is annoyed. Like, the town's got to do a better job cleaning up these strays. And she's thinking, boy, he's hungry. He's looking for something to eat.
I'm team, this town has to do something better with the strays. I see stuff like that, and 5 minutes later, I'm rambling on about taxes. Like,
yeah, but it starts to sow the seeds of this disconnect between this married couple.
That's the point.
Yeah. Inside, we see him take a Viagra, and she starts cutting some meat that's in the refrigerator. He had the whole place stocked for the weekend.
A great running joke in this movie is that they have to mention that's real Kobe beef. That's $200 a serve. They mention it 3 times throughout the movie, and I thought that was really funny. I hope that's actually in the movie, because Stephen King has a great sense of humor. And when people buy Kobe beef, they have to let people know. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's something about it. Like, it's yeah. Well, of course, I would too. But like, it's funny that they mention it 3 times throughout the movie. It's just a good little ongoing joke.
If you see her when she's cutting the meat, you're looking at the marbling, and you're thinking that's at least Wagyu, if not better.
Right. Yeah.
And she takes a plate outside, and he comes out to get her, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "That's Kobe beef from the actual Kobe region of Japan. That's $200 a serving." And she's like, "Oh, sorry, you want me to bring it in?" And he's like, "No, just leave it." So
it'll be the best meal he ever has, he says. Yeah.
So the dog gets this fantastic high-end beef served to him on a plate outside. Yeah. They go inside and oddly don't shut the door. It's off season. Nobody's in the area yet. No one's around, but still. And she looked back at it twice, like I didn't get the door, but doesn't go and shut it.
I shut my bedroom door. Never mind my front door. You know what I mean? Like,
she puts on a sexy nightie, and they kind of begin the foreplay. They're there to kind of rekindle their marriage. And again, we saw seeds of discontent. They weren't really matched up in their persona, but they're going to try to rekindle. And
there's some tension that's going on that I think anyone who's been in some type of relationship like that it's relatable, right? There's some kind of unspoken tension where this just isn't working. The chemistry has slipped. You know?
well, at least they're trying. They're like, let's go away for the
They're
weekend.
going through the motions, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So he cuffs her to the bed and she goes along with it. She's like, oh, what's this? Something they clearly hadn't done before. And then he starts a little foreplay, and he starts to go into this aggressive stranger rape fantasy. And she's trying, and you can see it on her face, and she's not into it. And she kind of stops him, and they argue a little bit. He accuses her of not trying, and she mentions how he hasn't touched her in months, and she's like, well, I know you got to take the Viagra. So there's like some deep rooted sexual relationship problems, that as well as any other issues in their marriage.
Well, I mean, anytime you have that scenario in a relationship, it's not the sexual issue. There's some underlying issue that wasn't taken care of, and having sexual relations doesn't fix that, right? Yeah. So like there was some other issue that they didn't take care of, and that's where this movie jumps into. It's fascinating.
It really is. He won't stop though. He tries again, and she's tied up. So it's almost becoming a real rape rather than a fantasy.
That's how it seems. Yeah.
She bites his lip, and he pulls back angry, and again starts blaming her for everything, and has a heart attack and falls dead on her. And she squirms and manages to push his body off, where it clunks to the floor, and he hits his head, and we see the blood slowly start to pool. And she yells, but there's no one around to hear her. As she's looking at the blood pooling, she realizes that he is dead, and she is completely trapped. The tops of the poles that she's cuffed to are too wide for the cuffs to go over. It's too tight for her to pull off.
Yeah, they're like 10-foot, 8-foot toes, something like that. Yeah.
And it's like, when I first watched the movie, first time I saw the movie, I'm like, she's going to be able to slide those right up over the edge, but she couldn't. I was wrong. The dog comes in, and this is what, the plot device of leaving the door open. That hungry dog wanders in. He just had all those beautiful steaks.
And they reference Cujo, like, oh, great, now you got Cujo. And I was like, I love when they do that with Stephen King stuff.
Yeah, there's actually a bunch of Easter eggs in this movie.
And Stephen King does that in his books. I think he's referenced Cujo in 3 of the books I read his.
Well, they allow them to take place in the same town, in the same world.
Universe.
So, yeah. So the dog comes in, and he starts licking Gerald's arm, and finally takes a bite of it. He tears off a piece. And she throws a book at him to scare him away that was up on the shelf above the bed. And what I thought was a really cool, wasn't even an Easter egg at the time, but the book was Midnight Mass.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah,
which Flanagan went on to direct a miniseries for Netflix.
Which is the second time that's in a Mike Flanagan. He also put that in Hush. That's the book she's working on, I believe.
Nice. So I love stuff like that. Scares him away, but only temporarily. So she begins to hallucinate Gerald being alive, and he's tormenting her. And he kind of represents all of her insecurities and doubts, and he kind of is lived his life reinforcing those things to her. That's what he kind of represents, making her not feel good about herself.
Yeah, it's almost like the abusive self comes out. Like he's like, hey, this is how I've been abusive to you, right?
Yeah, but this is coming from her own mind. So that's the part of her that really questions herself. And this is when he tells her that Cujo is going to eat you eventually.
Yeah.
But she also hallucinates a smart and confident version of herself that helps her. And it was kind of like a twisted tale on the angel and devil on your shoulder, telling you what to do.
Yeah.
He's belittling her, and then she's trying to lift her up. It's kind of fascinating how the two factors in her own mind battle.
There's the psychology to this that I found interesting, because what I find relatable about this movie is that I think we all do that, right? I think we all have like a part of ourselves that will look at a scenario and say, well, we'll look at it a certain way, and then we'll maybe double think it and be like, well, no, maybe that's this part of me thinking, and I shouldn't think that way. Or do you know what I mean? Like which we all call doubt. We all have self-doubt, right? And so this movie really plays into a lot of self-doubt and regret and kind of looking back at your past and seeing how it affects your future.
Yeah. She's dehydrating. All these things are going on with her body, and she remembers there's water. Actually, the good version of herself helps her remember there's water on the shelf above her, and she's able to tip the shelf with one hand and catch the water in the other hand. But because of the restrictions of the cuff, she can't get the water to her mouth. So she puts the water, she's about to drop it, and the good self says, "Don't you dare drop that water." So
I would have just tried to splash a shot in my mouth,
yeah,
which is why I wouldn't survive this situation.
So she puts it back, and with her other hand, she finds a tag, an old store tag that she'd taken off the nightie, and it's big. It's probably 2x4 cardboard, and she manages to roll it up and make a straw that she can reach into her mouth.
Which in itself is a tense scene because I'm watching. I'm like, don't drop it, don't drop
Right.
it. And they're doing it real slow. They're doing it nice and slow, or you think she might drop it.
Yeah, the horror in this movie is deep rooted. It's not there's some, but it's not in your face horror, but it's still deep and terrifying the same.
The horror in this movie, I like what the initial horror in this movie is really circumstantial, right? It's like you're tied to a bed and no one's coming to help you. You're gonna die in 3 days of starvation, or lack of water,
Yeah.
and then there's a dog at your door, right? Like that's horrific, right?
Yeah, and you're
Oh,
hallucinating.
and also your husband's dead in front of you, and the dog's looking at it. Like that's the whole
the
the
dog's
scenario.
tearing chunks out of him.
Yeah,
And you're hallucinating and reliving trauma of your past that we'll get to. So
right. It's
very layered psychological.
It's a layer horror,
torment.
right.
So she manages to get the cup with the straw in her mouth, and it manages to get several drinks. The good her says, "Don't drink it all. Save some for later," which I thought was clever. So she manages to put the cup and the straw back on the shelf for later use. The two voices continue to banter in her confused mind, and she wakes that night to see a mutated man in the corner, and he's kind of hidden in the shadows, but he steps into the light a little bit, and he's deformed, and he's carrying a box of jewels and trinkets.
And this is a classic. Not classic. This is a signature Mike Flanagan shot.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah,
it's subtle. It shows you enough to make it horrifying and not enough
out of the shadows. He's so good with stuff out of the shadows. Yeah.
And she just tells herself it's not real. The imagined Gerald is there, of course, the tormentor, and tells her it's the Moonlight Man, and he represents death. And he says, if he's not real, how come the dog's gone? Who scared away the dog? And he says, come on, he's gonna kill you, mouse. And and she's like, what did you say? And at the word mouse, it triggers her to flashback. And we go to a flashback scene taking place when she's a 12-year-old child. Her dad calls her Mouse. They have a family trip to the lake, and it's the day of the eclipse. And here's another overlap to another Stephen King book. Dolores Claiborne took place during an eclipse. And in the Dolores Claiborne book, there's a scene where Dolores sees a young girl at a lake with her father. And there's a scene where the young girl sees a woman over a well, and the eclipse ties the two books together. So that I always thought that was kind of a cool reference.
I did not know that. I'm going to have to read that book one day. Now, I did see the movie years and years ago. I watched Dolores Claiborne at like a weird age. I was like 13. Like, I don't know many 13-year-olds watch Dolores Claiborne. You know what I mean? But like, I watched it on a Saturday afternoon. I'd really have to go back and watch it again. And I'd really have to read the book too.
A book written specifically for to be made into a movie starring Kathy Bates after her performance in Misery.
Misery, yeah.
It made him say, I got a story in mind for her, and wrote that story. So there's another, Stephen King overlap.
Yeah.
12-year-old Jessie doesn't want to go out on the boat that day. So the father, and she has fighting with her mother. She has, typical 12-year-old issues. So the father stays behind with her, and he's, she's daddy's girl, and he's, like, sweet to her. But we watch him manipulate her to sit on his lap, and she's watching the eclipse through a safety visor that you can watch it through.
Yeah, the goggles type thing.
And while she's sitting there watching the eclipse, sitting on her dad's lap, he masturbates as the eclipse comes into view.
Yeah,
and it's man, it's uncomfortable.
and that's a metaphor in itself, right? Like in that moment, there's a darkening over her world, right? There's an eclipse. There's a lack of sunlight and joy in her life as that happens. That plays out.
Her world changed and
Yep.
darkened forever at that moment.
Right. It's very metaphorical.
And it was so uncomfortable.
It is.
And Flanagan doesn't shy away from the psychological impact of something like that, and he brings it right to the forefront and says,
yeah,
this moment in time has affected this woman for 30, 40 years and beyond.
and as far as movies, as far as actors like having to do that scene, like that guy had to do that scene with that girl, you know what I mean? Like, hey, we're just gonna act this out. Man, it's intense. I think it's intense that they have to do that stuff.
Yeah, and I guess it should be uncomfortable.
That's what I'm saying. It's supposed to be, right. It's a horror movie. This isn't a Saturday afternoon special, right? Like this is a horror movie.
Yeah, it's horror, but it delves into real life issues and real world problems and real, it's real horror.
It's
like The Girl Next Door.
Right. This isn't some
monsters,
ridiculous slasher that
horror.
would never happen. A Hellraiser, Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's deeper and more impactful to me.
I agree. Same. Yep. I think watching Hellraiser is easier. I'm like, yeah, do it again.
For sure.
I watched this scene and I'm like, oh.
Yeah. Jessie wakes up and her hands are bruised and cramped. It's not, she's got them stuck up in the air, and there's now flies gathering on Gerald. The strong her brings up the reminder of how Gerald was the same as the father, and she starts laying out all the similarities. And again, this is all stuff in her own mind, so she knows this, but she wants to dispute it, doesn't want it to be true, but she makes the points in an almost indisputable way. Gerald was a surrogate father and filled many of the same roles, good and awful, that he did.
Right. Yeah.
Gerald wakes up and points out a bloody footprint in the doorway and uses that as his proof that the Moonlight Man is real.
And what's cool about that is it plays a psychological trick on the audience, because there's, how like a boot in like mud or blood or whatever would have the ridges. Now there's no ridges. I looked at it, and there's no ridges, but it has the shape of a footprint. So is it in her mind? Right? Is it in her mind, or is it actually a footprint? And it's like, okay, now we're getting played on. Now there's some kind of trick that's being played either in her head or it's real.
And it's very unclear. Is she hallucinating this, or is this something real? And we start to like, maybe it was real, because of the footprint. And you're right, it's clearly not a dog print. But is it a barefoot? Is it in a sock?
Is it? Yeah, we don't know, right? Like, it's kind of just in the shape. It's
weird, and you don't know what to believe.
Yeah, you could look at marble tile and look at and find something like, hey, that looks like a face in a marble tile. It's like, no, it's just the way it waves and looks, right? Like the blood could have just formed that way.
Mm-hmm. She has a flashback at this point to kind of the aftermath of the incident with her father, and to me, this scene was, I don't want to say worse, but just as bad, because you can see this grown man manipulating her to do what he wants her to do. And basically he's playing in her to keep the event quiet and never tell anyone. And she never did.
Yeah.
Hadn't told anyone in her life up to this point that this happened.
Yeah. And it's insane dialogue. The dialogue in this movie is A+ in my opinion. I think the writing was done phenomenal for all the scenes. You watch a scene like this and it's just extremely manipulative, like to a point it almost seems like it came out of an FBI investigator's notebook.
Yeah. And it's, you can see like see right away it's manipulative. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
geez, what are we going to do, Mouse? And it's so like, hey, we're going to have to tell your mom. And
Yeah.
she's like, well, do we have to? He's like, well, I don't know. We should probably just own up to it.
You know,
And
she might blame it on you, but that's okay. And I'm just like, oh my God.
it's so bad. And my first note was the girl that plays the 12-year-old Jessie was out of this world good.
Yes. Yes.
So good.
Yeah.
So Jessie wakes. She has that flashback, and she wakes to the dog licking her toes, and the dog tries to take a bite of her foot,
Yeah.
but she manages to kick it away, and the dog takes a big fresh bite out of Gerald.
He's like, fine.
Yeah, oh, I'll get this. This is easier. Doesn't fight back. The imaginary Gerald again tells her she's going to die. And then in a awesome reference that I didn't catch the first time I saw this movie, he's like kind of rambling. He's like, you got the dog, you're starving, you got the moonlight man, all things serve the beam. It's a line right out of the Dark Tower series, and it's like just stuck in the middle.
Yeah. And
you know, which it's said commonly through the Dark Tower series.
That's one of your favorite series, right?
It's my favorite series.
It's your favorite series?
Not even, yeah. And I was like, I didn't notice that the first time I saw the movie, so I was thrilled when I saw that.
Yeah, yeah.
And she has a flashback again to her 12-year-old self at dinner that you think that very night. And her mother's talking to her, and she's holding the glass, and she squeezes the glass so hard it shatters in her hand.
That's the scene with Kate Siegel.
Yeah, and she's bleeding, and it's cut bad, and her dad takes her to the bathroom, cleans it up, and what she remembers is that the blood is slick as oil, and she comes to and has a plan. Like, this is her last ditch effort to get out of this plan. She's going to use the water glass to cut her wrist to make them slick and get out of the cuffs. And this isn't a gory movie. This is a psychological movie. This scene is as rough as any scene you will ever watch.
I agreed 100%. This is like Tom Savini level stuff right here. This was the practical effects made me go, ooh.
She breaks the glass on the edge of the shelf and then takes a shard and embeds it in the wood. So now it's just firmly sticking out there. And she uses it to slice inside of her wrist. And to me, she cut way deeper than you needed to.
I don't know. Because I was like, at first I was like, is she trying to kill herself? I don't know the rules of cutting your wrist. I don't know. That's why I was like, what? Like, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't almost matter, but
I've had 1,000 cuts, and they like, you can bleed pretty good without severing your hand off. I thought she's cut way too much.
Just cut the skin. That's all you needed. Yeah.
But she cuts it, and then she starts to pull her wrist out, and
it's Terminator 2 taking off the
her skin peels back, and it's sinew and muscle and
you see a little bone. You see a little bone, yeah.
And the skin's flapping up as it's getting pushed by the cuff. It's unbelievably brutal.
It's a fantastic scene.
But she continues and gets it all the way out.
Yeah.
And at this point, she's weak. She's hallucinating. Blood loss now starts to come into play.
She can't use that hand. She has to like grab her like the key with her mouth. Yeah.
She gets the key and gets herself unlocked. She patches her wrist using feminine napkins just to try to stop the blood flow. And she turns to leave, and she's weak, and she topples and she falls over. And we wonder if she got the strength to get out of here after all she's been through. And she wakes. It's now night. This all happened during the day. She wakes in the dark, and the dog is growling. And she sees Gerald's face has been basically eaten off, and his ears are missing. And she gets up, and she makes her over to the dresser, and she gets the keys to the car. She hears a click, and the car beeps outside. And she turns to go down the walkway to get out, and the Moonlight Man is there. He's at
the very end of the hall, almost like Nun type thing, like in the Nun, how it's all the way at the end.
Yeah, just standing there, and he's holding his box of trinkets, and she walks up to him, and she takes her ring off and drops it in his box of trinkets and keeps going. And it's like an unnerving scene, because it's like, okay, is it real? Is he not real? We still don't know because there's no interaction.
Everything's still in her head at this point, right? Yeah.
Yeah. She gets in the car and starts driving away, but she's very weak. She's very tired. She keeps fading in and out. At one point, she looks in the mirror and hallucinates the Moonlight Man in the back seat, and he leans forward and whispers "mouse" in her ear, and she crashes the car. Luckily, people find her, help comes, and she makes it out of there. We move forward, and she was able to collect the life insurance on Gerald. She started a foundation for abused kids, and she notes that she never told the story about her dad, and now she tells it every single day because you got to talk about it, and she wants to help people.
Yeah.
Very noble. The scene was cleaned up. Gerald's company kept everything quiet, so there was no embarrassment, but they never found her wedding ring. And she also, she's kind of moved on in life, but she sees the Moonlight Man every night before she falls asleep. And it's a really creepy image.
His eyes are like red, it's almost, yeah.
6 months later, a man with acromegaly is arrested. And he's a cannibal and a necrophile.
A grave robber.
He is the deformed Moonlight Man, and he's real. And she goes to his. This is why Gerald's ears were missing. This is why her ring never turned up. She goes to his arraignment and just walks in the middle of his arraignment and interrupts. And he turns around, and he hasn't spoken since he's been arrested.
Not even to his lawyer, they say. He won't even speak to his lawyer. He hasn't said a word of English. Yep.
She turns and walks right up to the front of the court, right to the bars, and he turns around and he breaks his restraints.
This guy's the size of Frankenstein, right? He's huge.
Absolutely. And he's got the elongated head and the big forehead and
he speaks massive, like this. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a legitimate disease, but you just don't see it very often, fortunately. And he's a nightmare.
Yeah.
And he actually speaks to her, and he repeats to her what she said to him, that you're made of all moonlight. And I didn't. He's think you're not real.
Yeah, he smiles. Yeah,
because she didn't think he was real. Now he repeats it back to her, "You're not real," and she says,
smiles. He's elated, like you were real.
Yeah, yeah. And in him, she sees him, and then she sees her dad, and then she sees Gerald, and it's kind of like all of her trauma encapsulated in this one confrontation.
Yeah,
and she says, "You're so much smaller than I remembered."
Yeah,
and she turns and walks away, and it's really a cleansing. Not that trauma ever goes away, but it's just a cleansing of the impact, and she's kind of rising above it.
In order to get over, any kind of PTSD or situation or any kind of trauma, I should say, is you need to recognize and confront the malevolence that encountered you originally, right? Because malevolence can cause people to have traumatic shock, right? And then here's a simple example. If 200 pounds falls on your chest, it can kill you, right? Because you weren't expecting it. But at the same time, an individual can bench press 200 pounds over and over and over again and get stronger, right? So that same weight, depending on the willingness of the individual's ability to approach it, can either kill them or make them stronger. And that's kind of just how life happens to people. Sometimes malevolent things happen to people and it traumatizes them. But if they can learn to understand what it was that they encountered and confront it, we call that a form of therapy. We call, that's a way to move forward. And that's kind of how this movie ends. She confronts it.
Yeah. And it's her taking back control moment. And it's wonderfully done. As I mentioned, the acting in this movie is outstanding. It's a career role for Carla Gugino.
Yeah,
she's incredible. All the different things she goes through, the emotion she conveys. Bruce Greenwood is Gerald. He's outstanding. These, of course, become common actors in Flanagan films.
Yeah, the daughter. Yeah,
and the 12-year-old version of Jesse was
right. That's what I meant. Yeah,
fantastic. I had one logic question that threw me on this movie. And the movie's from 2017. They don't really paint a timetable of when this takes place, but they have cell phones and the cars are modern. So I'm assuming it takes place somewhere around 2017.
Mm-hmm.
The phone is sitting on the nightstand next to her.
Mm-hmm.
Siri was added to iPhones, which it was an iPhone in 2011. And my first was like, why isn't she saying,
Siri called 911?
hey, Siri, call 911?
Yeah.
Because it's 6 years after Siri was, oh my God, my Siri is calling 911. I shouldn't have said that.
Nah.
I was thinking, me and my wife were talking about, we were watching, it's like, she could have called 911 before the phone died. But other than, I think this is an amazing movie. Again, it's not action packed. It takes place in basically one room. But the acting in
it's like 3-4 actors.
Yeah.
Psychologically, this is one of the most interesting thrillers I've ever seen. I'm mad that I took this long to watch it. Huge Mike Flanagan. I don't know why I took this long to watch it. I'm gonna have to watch this movie again because I feel like this movie is an onion, and there's just more things you need to like get from it when you watch it again.
Listen for all things serve the beam.
Yeah. There's a lot in this movie psychologically that, I mean, you just can't take it all in the first time. Very well written, very well acted, very great direction, cinematography. I had zero complaints. I'll counter your. I'd like to counter your Siri by saying the phone was dead, but it wasn't. So
it was at the end when she finally got free.
When she finally gets with her toe. Yeah. That's a great point with Siri.
Yeah. I got to get. I think my wife said that, so I got to give her credit. But then I couldn't stop thinking about it.
but I bet they didn't have service. I mean, they were out in the middle of nowhere.
Well, she went for the phone to try to make a call, but it was dead once she was free. So kind of indicating she thought they would have service, and they've been to the lake house before. So
I barely get service half the places I go nowadays, anyway. So I'm sketchy about it.
I'm nitpicking, of course, because I love this movie, and actually, the second time through, I actually enjoyed it more than I did the first time. It's so deep, and it's so well done. And if you're looking for a profile of psychological trauma, this is it.
Just an intelligent movie that's just deep and interesting. Yeah, I agree. I'm gonna have to watch this again. Maybe me and my girlfriend have to watch it.
Great choice.
Yep.
Well, that is our category for this week. Love hurts. We see a couple dramatically different examples of how painful it can be. Love can be wonderful, but in the horror world, it certainly has its downsides.
Yeah, if you're looking for a deep psychological movie followed up by a comedy, I think these two will do just fine.
All right. Well, happy Valentine's Day to all. We are the Weekly Horoscope. I'm Jerry, and that's Matt, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, everybody. Happy Valentine's Day.
Your Weekly Horoscope with Jerry and Matt.